Have you ever stopped to think about the plumbing of our financial system? I mean, the actual infrastructure that moves trillions of dollars around the world every single day. A lot of it is built on decades-old technology. But what if we could rebuild it all from scratch? What if we could make it faster, more transparent, and just way more efficient? Well, that's not a hypothetical anymore. There's a huge shift happening right now, powered by a technology that's completely changing the game for how assets are created, traded, and managed. And the sheer scale of this is, well, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
Just look at this number. We're talking about a potential market for what's called tokenized assets that could top $23 trillion. To give you some perspective, that is bigger than the entire annual GDP of the United States. So yeah, this is not some small niche trend. This is a fundamental rewiring of the machinery of finance.
So, what's the engine behind all this? It's something called distributed ledger technology, or DLT. And that really is the new financial plumbing we're talking about. To understand the opportunity, we first have to pop the hood and see how this new plumbing actually works. At its heart, DLT is just a new way of keeping records. See, instead of one bank or one company controlling a central database, imagine a shared book that everyone involved has a copy of. Every time a transaction happens, everyone works together to verify it and add it to the book. Then, it's locked in using some really powerful cryptography. And here's the magic trick. Once a record is in that book, it's immutable. You can't change it, you can't delete it. It creates a single, permanent, and trustworthy history of everything.
Think about the old way versus the new way. The traditional model is a centralized database. That means there's a single point of control, but that's also a single point of failure. It leads to endless, expensive work just making sure everyone's version of the truth actually matches up. DLT completely flips that on its head. It creates a shared single source of truth. You don't need to reconcile anything because everyone is already looking at the exact same pre-verified data. It's just built to be more resilient from the ground up.
Okay, but this is where it gets really powerful. This new ledger isn't just a fancy static database. It's programmable, and that's all thanks to something called smart contracts. You can think of them as little bits of code, little robots that live on the ledger. They're basically just if-then statements. If this condition is met, then automatically execute this action. This is the secret sauce that automates everything from paying out a dividend to checking if a transaction follows the rules. And here's a brilliant way to think about the two main flavors these networks come in. You've got public networks like Ethereum, which are a lot like the public internet. They're permissionless. Anyone can access them. Anyone can build on them. Then you have private networks, which are more like a company's internal intranet. Access is permissioned. It's restricted only to known, approved users. So big financial firms can choose what they need: maximum open accessibility or maximum control and security.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of the tech. Now, let's connect the dots. How does all this lead to that massive multi-trillion-dollar opportunity? And why is Wall Street paying such close attention?
Well, this tech isn't going to change everything all at once. The really huge impact, especially at first, is expected in the back office. We're talking about the complicated, slow, and expensive processes of clearing, settling trades, and servicing assets. The stuff that's not glamorous, but it's where the biggest headaches and costs are in the current system.
And if you look at which assets are the most ready for this kind of makeover, it's probably not what you'd think. It's not everyday stocks and bonds. The biggest opportunity is in the stuff that's traditionally been really hard to trade. Things like private equity, private debt, and funds that own big physical things like real estate or infrastructure. These are the markets that today are famously slow, clunky, and illiquid.
And here's one of the key reasons why. This technology makes something called fractionalization super easy. You can take a huge, expensive asset, like a skyscraper or a big stake in a private company, and digitally slice it up into thousands or even millions of tiny pieces. This completely changes the game, right? It could potentially open up these very exclusive investment areas to a much, much wider group of people.
So when you put it all together, the automation from smart contracts, the new efficiencies, the new markets you can create, the potential savings are just mind-boggling. Some estimates suggest that DLT could strip out up to $1 trillion in annual costs from the global financial system's infrastructure. That's a huge incentive to make a change.
Which, of course, brings us to the most obvious question. If this technology is so great, with all this potential for new revenue and massive savings, why hasn't it just taken over the financial world already? What's the catch?
Well, before we dive into the roadblocks, it's really important to know that this isn't just theory anymore. The big players are already getting their hands dirty and putting this stuff into practice.
So let's take a look at one of the most visible examples out there today. I'm talking about BlackRock, the largest asset manager on the planet, and their tokenized fund, which is called Buoyed. This is a super interesting real-world experiment that shows us exactly how this technology can be rolled out right now, today.
So let's break down how this thing works. First off, the Build token isn't some crazy new cryptocurrency. It's a digital representation of a share in a very stable, highly regulated US money market fund. And get this, it runs on the public Ethereum network. That's a big deal. Now, instead of getting a cash dividend, the yield is paid out every single day by giving you more tokens. So your token balance just grows automatically. But here's the crucial part. Access is locked down tight. It's only for big, qualified institutional investors, and all the compliance is baked right into the code using a whitelist. If your digital wallet address isn't on the approved list, the smart contract literally won't let you touch the tokens.
So what BlackRock has done here is pretty clever. They've essentially blended the best of both worlds. They're tapping into the efficiency and the global reach of a public network, but they've layered on the strict permissioned controls of a private system. It's a hybrid model that keeps the regulators happy while still getting the benefits of the new tech.
That BlackRock example is incredibly cool, but it also shows you all the hoops you have to jump through. And that brings us right to the major challenges, the really significant hurdles that are keeping DLT from just becoming the default way we do finance.
You can really boil down all the problems into two main buckets. First, there are still some big questions about the technology itself. Can it really handle the scale and security that finance demands? And second, and this one might be even bigger, there is a huge fog of regulatory uncertainty.
On the tech side, you've got a few key concerns. Scalability is a big one. Public networks can get clogged up, which makes transactions slow and expensive. Security is, of course, everything. You have to guard against network-wide failures, not to mention future threats like quantum computers that could theoretically break today's encryption. And then there's this fascinating legal puzzle around data privacy. Laws like Europe's GDPR give you the right to be forgotten. So, how do you do that with a technology that's designed by its very nature to never forget anything? It's a real head-scratcher.
But, as tough as those tech challenges are, they might not even be the biggest problem. The number one risk often comes from, as one analysis puts it, unclear, inconsistent, or rapidly evolving laws. In other words, nobody knows the exact rules of the road yet.
All around the world, regulators are wrestling with some really fundamental questions. Like, legally, what even is one of these tokens? Is it a security, a commodity? Is it something totally new? Then you add the fact that every country is making up different rules, creating this incredibly complex and expensive patchwork of compliance. And at the end of the day, most of our financial laws were written decades, even centuries ago. They were just never designed for a world of natively digital assets.
So where does that leave us? What's the path forward? How do we actually get from these exciting but small-scale experiments to that multi-trillion-dollar future everyone's talking about? Well, it seems like the only way forward is through collaboration.
It all boils down to this one central tension. On one side, you have the incredible promise of innovation, the chance to build a better, faster, cheaper financial system. And on the other side, you have the absolutely critical job of regulators to protect investors and keep the entire system stable. Finding that perfect balance between the two is the challenge that will define the next decade of finance.
And that leaves us with the ultimate trillion-dollar question. Will the tech innovators and the government rulemakers find a way to work together to build this new future? Or is the friction between fast-moving technology and slow-moving regulation going to grind progress to a halt? The answer to that question is truly going to shape the future of capital markets for all of us.